Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We've got a few people that are going to be hopping on here. Thanks for your patience. In the meantime, enjoy this beautiful graphic describing what we're going to be talking about today. We'll get started in about 60 seconds or so. We want to be mindful of your time. I'll be back in exactly 1 minute. Thanks. All right, everybody, welcome. This is the second volume of what we like to call the hashtag Slinkythink sessions. My name is Drew Kinchis, and I am the marketing director at BeLife LLC. Why do we call all of this the hashtag Slinkythink sessions? Well, we'll get to that in just a little bit. But what we're going to be talking about today is how to empower remote teams. So it sounds pretty ideal to allow individuals to work wherever they want. But as with most things in life, there are some caveats to making all of this work. So we're going to go over a little bit about some of the misconceptions of what people think about remote work, why these misconceptions exist, and then how you, whether or not you're leading a remote team or if you're just part of a remote team, how you can help to keep people connected, keep people engaged and motivated moving forward. So a little bit about us. I'm just going to hop to the next slide here, which, by the way, I just want to make sure that the group chat is working throughout the session today. If you do have any thoughts, any questions or anything, feel free to just drop us a line via the chat. We do not have the video or audio set up. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit us up on there. Myself and Chris Daly, our fearless leader, will be looking at the chat feature as we continue. There are only one Chris Daly that I know, the one that I know that exists in the world, although it looks like on our participants panel we have two Chris Dalys. I am one of them, so we have not cloned Chris, but he's also with us today. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and introduce Chris, let him talk a little bit about what BeLife is, what we do, give him a chance to just talk about the organization, and then you'll be hearing from yours truly for the rest of the session. So Chris, Mr. Daly, take it away.
Hello, everybody. As Drew said, my name's Chris Daly, and our company BeLife is a agile training and coaching firm. We are primarily focused on the individuals. We believe that individuals are what power the organization. And so all of our, everything we're doing in terms of workshops, everything we're doing in terms of seminar content, webinars, everything like that is focused on providing you information and the tools that you might need to empower you to go forward in your job. And we've been doing this for, I've been doing this for a long time. BeLife has been around for 4 years. We're in our, actually starting our second year of going at this full time. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us with this webinar.
Cool, thanks, Chris. So as Chris mentioned, you know, the goal for BeLife, you know, we're helping individuals be the best they can be. And we're doing this through agile methodologies and people-focused practices. So what the heck is BeLife? Well, BeLife is an imaginary word that we created. It's basically a sentence all in one. So BeLife. So the idea there is to be agile. I'd like to ask everybody if you can participate very quickly in the group chat. Give us a thumbs up if you are familiar with Agile, or if you use any Agile methodologies. Do you use Scrum? Do you use Kanban? So on and so forth. Give us a heads up if you do. If you don't know what any of these things are, or you're pretty unfamiliar, hit us up with a question mark. I'd like to see, just get a brief survey of where everybody's at regarding Agile. Excellent. So Vicky, they use Scrum. Fantastic. So yeah, feel free to, okay, Scrum and Kanban, great. So yeah, feel free to post your level of familiarity with what's going on here. And as Chris mentioned before, well, so let's talk about Slinkythink really quickly. Slinkythink is, I'm a marketing kind of guy. I'm a creative, as they say. And Chris and I are really excited about Agile because it empowers individuals to transform organizations to be their best. And so we originally used the term #Slinkythink to describe the way that we think as an organization. Now, our logo is a Slinky, and thus being agile like a Slinky. But we love the idea also of #Slinkythink, meaning not only what our mindset is, but also the mindset of the individuals that we're empowering. So hence why we're calling this the #Slinkythink sessions, in that we are not only using that hashtag to describe how we feel, but also to best encapsulate what we're trying to do to empower individuals and organizations. So if you need to see what we look like, that's Chris, that's myself. How exciting. So the goal of today, we're going to tackle some of the biggest myths of remote work, why they exist, and how you as a leader can empower you and your remote teams to be more connected and impactful. So a quick little review of what's going to be happening today, the agenda. We've already gone through introductions, so that's said and done. We are going to be talking about remote work today. You know, what are the conditions in 2019 for remote work? What's the environment look like out there in the big world? And then we're going to talk about the biggest myths of remote work. A lot of people are familiar with it, but what I've found in my experience is a lot of people talk about remote work in the third person, and that they're generally familiar with it. And there's a lot of myths. The idea that people just sit around on their couch in sweatpants and work from home. That is certainly one I hear about all the time. And then we're going to talk about how we can empower remote teams, and that's going to be the section 4. And then we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions if you all have them. So as I mentioned before, if you do have questions throughout today's webinar, feel free to shoot them to me via the Zoom group chat feature. So no worries there. All right, so what does remote work look like today in 2019? So a very quick definition of what remote work is. I think all of you are probably pretty familiar with the idea. And this is actually a textbook definition. I hadn't looked up what remote work was according to a dictionary, but the definition I found here is it's a working style that allows professionals to work outside of a traditional office environment. And I think the real takeaway is that it is based upon the concept that work does not need to be done in a specific place to be executed successfully. And the big takeaway from that is the last word of this slide, which is successfully. There's not a lot of incentive to provide the flexibility that remote work brings if it's not going to allow our individuals and our organizations to be successful. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is a fantastic song. If you haven't heard it, I would highly suggest it. My parents are both actually turning 70 this year. They have their 70th birthday anniversaries and their, I don't know, birthday anniversary, though that's a redundant statement, but their 50th wedding anniversary is also this year. And they would play this song because they enjoyed the farcical nature of it from Dan Hicks. But How Can I Miss You If You Won't Go Away? If you go on YouTube and look this up, it's a fun little song. But I put this here because there's the old phrase, right, that fondness makes the heart, or absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? And there's something to be said about the flexibility, the freedom that not being in a cubicle, so to speak, brings with remote work. But with that being said, there's an entirely new set of challenges that comes with that sort of flexibility. And a lot of that comes from the lack of physical proximity with the team. So let's talk about what's going on with remote work right now. So in 2016, Dell announced plans to further expand its telecommuting and remote work initiatives, and they saved $12 million annually from reduced office space costs. As you can imagine, a lot of these really, really large tech companies have a massive workforce, and to be able to have building after building after building to house all these individuals just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, a great segue into the next point, although several companies think an open office plan encourages collaboration, most employees would prefer to work remotely. That's another really interesting tidbit there. When I think of large work environments from big tech companies, I think of Facebook, and that they have a very large headquarters where it's open space collaboration. But according to statistics, most people, if they had the option, if they had to choose one or the other between an open office plan or just being able to work remotely, they would actually prefer to work remotely, which I thought was a pretty interesting statistic. And in 2017, Austin had over 60% of its tech job offers going to workers outside of Texas, while San Francisco had over 30% going to workers outside of the city. Now, those two cities are interesting examples because if you think of Austin and you think of the state of Texas, it is a very large geographical area, right? So that allows for companies to hire individuals that might not be within 5, 10, 15, 20 miles and still be able to contribute to their organization. In San Francisco, as we all know, it is one of the most expensive cities to live in the entire country, in the whole world. And so for San Francisco to be able to pull a talent base that's not just in San Francisco or not just in the Bay Area, but also anywhere that they want in the world is pretty exciting potential. So regular work at home employees among the non-self-employed population has grown by 140% since 2005. And that's nearly 10 times faster than the rest of the workforce or the self-employed. So this is a steadily growing group of individuals who are working remotely. This I thought was pretty interesting as well, that an increase in remote work could help bridge the gender gap in the tech industry, and that 56% of women in the tech industry leave their jobs mid-career, and 51% of women say being a working mother made it difficult for them to advance in their careers. Obviously, if not only mothers, but fathers, for them to be able to have the ability to stay at home a little bit more and take care of newborns and their kids, and also still be able to contribute to their organizations is pretty powerful. And lastly, in fact, remote companies have 4 times as many female CEOs than non-remote companies. That's a really exciting consideration there, in that instead of mothers having to decide, well, I'm going to have children or continue with my career, they don't have to decide one or the other, that they can continue to foster their career and also be able to have a family at the same time. So that's pretty exciting. So what big companies are remote right now? Well, some of these I think are pretty obvious, right? I mean, we talked about Dell as a big tech company. We have Glassdoor and Humana are a couple as well. I put on this slide because I would imagine that most people would assume that Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft have a substantial remote workforce. They all do, and these are 3 of the top 10 biggest companies in the world. So something to think about there, that, you know, remote work is not a trend. It is not something that's just going to show up and go away. When I was a lot younger, I'm 33, but almost 33, my birthday is tomorrow. But when I was a lot younger, I remember people claiming that the internet and email was going to be this fad that was going to go away pretty soon. And obviously, I think we can all agree it's here to stay. Same thing with remote work. You know, as we are able to make the world a smaller place due to technology, it's only going to be able to open up more doors for us to be more flexible with how we work. So really quickly, I don't know if you all have heard of Flex Jobs, but it is a online database for remote work. I won't take too much time going through these, but a lot of times we think of graphic design or coder, or we tend to think about traditional jobs that are computer-based being remote jobs. But some of these roles are certainly outside of what I would consider to be the traditional remote positions. Animal relocation manager, digital retouching artist is one that I think is a little bit more along the traditional line, so to speak. I thought specifically on this next slide, a space reporter. That just sounds fun. I don't care if you're working remotely or not. That just sounds like a really good time to report about what's happening in space. I would assume one of the perks of that is if you could go up in space to report, that would be a pretty exciting thing there. But as you can see with a lot of these roles as well, it's not just the roles themselves that are pretty creative in that they don't have to have a physical location to work from. But if you look, there's like medical director, you know, they're asking for at least 10 years of clinical experience. So remote work is not just for individuals who are starting their career or just getting started at a certain business, but they are for experienced professionals within particular industries as well. Great quote from Maya Angelou here. We allow our ignorance to prevail upon us and make us think we can survive alone, alone in patches, alone in groups, alone in races, even alone in genders. So why do I bring this up? Well, it sounds great to have the freedom, the flexibility of being able to quote unquote work on your own. I'm a fiercely independent person, so to be able to decide where I want to work from is huge to me. I can pick different environments to work from based on the kind of mood I'm in, or if I'm looking to get more interaction from my environment and the people that I'm working around. But to be truly alone even though we are surrounded, let's say you're working at a coffee shop, if you're surrounded by a lot of individuals, but you're the only remote employee who's part of a team that everyone else is working in one physical environment, that can be a pretty lonely way to work. And so isolation wears down on us as human beings. It's the basic necessity of all of us as individuals, is to feel needed and to feel that we're part of something bigger. So I think this is important to keep in mind as we go through today's webinar. So let's talk about some of the myths of remote work. And as I'm going through these, I would like for you to just put something in the group chat. You can either put like a hand wave or whatever you want if you've heard these myths before. So myth number 1, remote work decreases worker productivity. If you've heard of this myth before, give me a thumbs up or a high five or whatever it may be. So this is a myth. The fact is that actually productivity is increased. So give me 1 second here. Sorry, a little technological snafu. There's always something going on. There we go. So productivity is actually increased with remote workers. So study after study has proven that remote workers actually get more done. And some of these aspects that we find to be advantageous of physical workplaces can actually be treated as distractions. So as mentioned here, water cooler gossip, impromptu meetings, loud colleagues. If you know someone who's a heavy chewer, or somebody likes to play music, or we all know someone who doesn't have an indoor voice, they only have an outdoor voice and that's it. Those can be very distracting for individuals. And to be able to work remotely, you can decide which environment you like to work in, and so you can minimize a lot of those distractions. What's really interesting, and I'll mention it in this next bullet here, but it takes 15 minutes to hop from one task to another, to be focused on one thing and to go to another, right? And so every time you get distracted, you go back to that 15-minute window to get back into the zone. And so as the statistic mentions here, 86% of those surveyed said they would prefer to work alone to hit maximum productivity. And what I would describe as maximum productivity is being quote unquote in the zone. When you are truly not aware of what's happening around you, you're really focusing on your work. Now that's not just employees in general. 2/3 of managers say that employees who work remotely increase their overall productivity. So that study not only said that not only dictated that the remote workers themselves thought they were being more productive, but the managers agreed with that as well. And then also 82% of telecommuters reported lower stress levels. So that is a significant number there. So that is something certainly to not overlook. So myth number 2, working from home is a detriment to productivity or employee engagement. Fact, remote employees are more invested. So sorry about this. A recent study on the state of remote work found that remote employees have slightly higher levels of investment in their work and benefit from clearer boundaries and work habits needed to be successful. And this data, which is based on over 1,000 responses from workers across the US, showed that people who work from home are fully engaged with fellow team members and are often more productive. So there's a big asterisk on this statement. This does not mean that every single person who's ever been a remote worker is fully engaged with their environment. But if we are passionate about the things that we do, we want to connect with others who are also passionate about our work. And so when we're all creating and producing at the same time, we can really find a lot of trust and commonality that way. Allowing employees to work remotely means significant decreases in operating costs, which means you can pay your employees more, which turns out might make those employees happier. I mentioned in that statistic before that Dell had saved $12 million annually from having a remote workforce versus having to have everyone come in to a physical environment and work together. This is really interesting. Working at home could make your marriage happier. Married remote workers reported feeling there was a fairer or more general neutral division of work done around the house. This study was done on responses from thousands of workers based in Switzerland and the UK, and the study found that working from home made married couples perceivably happier, although there was no effect on the love life of single employees in the UK. So go figure. Myth number 3, remote workers want to combine work and travel. So that is obviously a myth. And the fact is that remote employees crave balance. So in the state of remote work in 2018 by Buffer, 43% of respondents said they only combine work and travel between 1% and 10% of the year. And most of those people surveyed were in the tech industry. So that is something I hear a lot about in remote work, is that people say, well, I can just go on vacation whenever I want because I can take my work with me on vacation. You know, I don't ever have to take time off. But this statistic states the opposite of that, and that although there is that flexibility of technically being able to work, people want to truly be invested in their own free time. People want to be invested in their vacations, especially if you're traveling with a significant other or with your family. People don't want to be staring at screens or working on things while they're, you know, traveling across Europe or you know, visiting whatever exotic place they haven't been to before. So 2 out of 3 respondents in a survey conducted by Polycom Inc. said they are more productive working remotely than when they worked at an on-site office. 3 out of 4 respondents said working remotely helps them with their work-life balance. And according to research by Gartner, organizations that embrace remote working will increase employee retention rates by 10%. So often remote work is treated as a perk, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, why it shouldn't be treated as a perk. It should be treated as something that you are offering to employees as part of their benefits, to say that they can work remotely. So myth number 4, acquiring talent via remote work is a perk, not a necessity. As I just mentioned a second ago, it is incredibly important to allow your employees to have a remote work option. So 68% of job seekers who are millennials said an option to work remotely would greatly increase their interest in specific employers. Just a few short years ago, working from home today may have seemed out of reach for some industries, but today it's not so much. In 2015, 23% of employees reported doing some of their work remotely, up from 19% in 2003. So you look at that number and you say, my word, it's only a 4% jump in 12 years. But if you consider how many individuals are in the workforce itself, a 4% increase is pretty substantial. In a 2017 study by IT solutions company SoftChoice, 74% of 1,000 office workers surveyed said that they would leave their job for another that offered the option of more remote work. So that is fascinating to me, that if you had 2 identical roles and one role was you only could work at a certain place for your 40 hours a week, or how many hours you work, and the other job allowed you to work remotely, even let's say one day, because if you look at that statistic, it does say the option of remote work. It doesn't say you're only a remote employee. That people, 74%, 3 out of 4 people would take the remote job. That's really interesting. And then worldwide, more than 50% of people who telecommute part-time said they wanted to increase their remote hours. 80% of knowledge workers in a global survey said that they work from home, and 60% of remote workers in the survey said that if they could, they would leave their current job for a full-time remote position at the same pay rate. So this is a global phenomenon, and instead of putting this low on the priority list for benefits for employees or for your teammates, consider this remote option. Put this a little bit higher in the list, because we see from these statistics, it's really important for talent acquisition and retention. So this seems pretty awesome. It seems like a no-brainer. So why aren't all companies remote? Well, remote teams aren't harder or easier than physical environments. The great remote teams utilize existing tried and true methods for developing workplace culture, but in a more creative way. So Chris and I like to say in these workshops that if there's one thing you should take away from this workshop, let this be it. And this is one of the big takeaways from today's webinar, is that if one member of your team is remote, the entire team is remote. It's really important to stop thinking about, well, we have a physical office and then we have one individual who works outside of that physical environment, because you're being exclusive to that individual. And that is a core reason of why often remote employees feel isolated, because the majority of the people that work in a certain environment are together in a physical space. And then as a remote employee, if you're outside of that circle, you don't feel as connected as everyone else does. All right, so here's the big reveal, the secrets of how to create a happy and productive remote team. So secret number one, which by the way, you will get these slides right when this session is done. So if you're taking notes, I very much appreciate that. But you can also, if some of you are chewing and enjoying lunch, feel free to continue to do that and just keep watching the screen. But secret number one is to be proactive and less reactive. So what do I mean by that? So make communication the norm, not the exception. So oftentimes, and this is not just remote teams, but in work environments in general, we create communication channels where we expect individuals to, quote unquote, contact us if they need anything. So the problem with that is it doesn't create a continuous stream of feedback amongst teammates, right? If you create an environment where the idea is, well, only contact me if you need something, most people won't even do that in a physical environment. So imagine in a remote team how challenging it is for someone to flag another teammate within the remote organization down for something that they need right away. So make communication the norm, not the exception. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can create communication channels that are instant, that allowed for quick feedback, and allow for everyone on a remote team to be able to communicate with one another and not have to be giant meetings, giant Zoom webinars, so on and so forth. So Chris and I at BeLife, we are big fans of AGILE, as we were preaching before, and we are big fans of a lot of what consists of the Scrum framework, right? So if you're not doing this already, I would highly suggest trying a daily stand-up. And I've done this in a few organizations actually before I even knew what AGILE was. And what I would suggest is a daily stand-up is very simple. All you do is you talk about what you did yesterday. You're going to talk about what you're doing today. And then if there's anything that is in your way, or what we like to call our blockers. So if you can have a very quick call at the beginning of every day, that is one way that you can do this, to allow for everyone to share and to just give everyone a few minutes and to keep this short and sweet. This is not an hour-long meeting that you want to have. In organizations that I've worked at, we've actually used a Slack channel to do these daily stand-ups. So instead of having to get everybody in the same room or on the same phone call, so on and so forth, you can actually instead just use Slack. And like, I'm an early riser. Chris and I are both early risers, and so we tend to get going pretty early. But if Chris wanted to start his day at 6 a.m. and I wanted to start my day at 7 a.m., it's not a big deal. He can just put his 3 quips for the daily stand-up, what he did yesterday, what he's doing today, and what's in his way there. And so when I start working at 7, I can see that, and then I can drop my contributions for the daily stand-up, and then we can help each other out with that. Bi-weekly retrospectives are also very important, or something I would suggest. This is also part of the Scrum framework, in that a retrospective, it allows you every couple of weeks to allow your team to provide honest feedback for one another of how the last week or how the last 2 weeks have gone. So think of this as almost a macro stand-up, where you're going to talk about what have you done over the last couple of weeks, what do you plan on doing for the next couple weeks, and how you can just consistently be iterative and improve your processes. So those are a couple of tips that I would highly suggest. And if you have any questions about how to set some of that up, feel free to hit us up directly, and we'll be more than happy to talk more about it. Ask for feedback from your remote employees ahead of meetings. This is something that would drive me nuts working on teams that had remote employees, is that the physical room of people who were meeting would all talk and converse with one another. And then at the very end of the meeting, they would go, oh yeah, there's that person on the phone. I forgot they were there. Do you have anything you'd like to contribute? And if you're trying to guarantee that people don't care and if they're not going to be engaged during the meetings, just pretend like they're not there, because that's what you're doing. So ask for feedback from remote employees ahead of meetings, and know what they need to be talking about and what they want to bring up ahead of time, and ask them first. You know, start the meeting with your remote employees and get their feedback, and then move the meeting from there. I think that's a really powerful tool. And you should just try that from everyone. Instead of going into meetings and asking for everybody's feedback all at the same time, solicit some of that feedback in advance, and so you can tailor the meeting a little bit better based on what people's needs are. Adopt and commit to visual project communication tools. It is much harder to micromanage someone in a remote situation than a physical work environment, because you can't see them doing their actual work. But on the other side of that, if you can't see any progress that your remote employees are making, that's also problematic. And so Chris and I are big fans of using Trello to be able to allow each other to see who's working on what, where we're at. And the big value in using a visual project management tool like Trello is you're being open and transparent to what's going on, right? And if you're struggling with something, it's okay to say, I'm having issues with this. I need your help. I'm struggling with something. And just to be able to do that in an open and honest way is really important. And you can actually see too, the flow of work going from left to right via Trello or whatever visual management tool you're using. And if you can track how long it's taking to get projects done, you can see where some of those blockers are, and you can figure out how to remove some of those to help the team to be more efficient. And then get everyone on the same page, and I put web page since we're talking remote teams, via a team agreement. So a team agreement is a really, really awesome tool that allows for your remote teams to be all on the same page. I'm not going to go into this too much, but I'm going to send you a message right after this webinar with the slides, and it's also going to have a how-to of how to create a working team agreement. And so these team agreements are really good for teams with most people are working remotely, 12 or fewer people, and for teams that have some shared tools in place. So the idea of the team agreement is to get everybody on the same page with what are the expectations amongst all the team members. So, you know, how are we communicating? How are we keeping everyone up to date with what we're working on? If there's an emergency, what does that hierarchy look like? Do I call? Is it a Zoom call? You know, for me personally, if somebody needs me right now, I expect them to call. And then a somewhat urgent but not incredibly urgent matter would be somebody texting me. And then from there, I would say email, and then it's kind of a grab bag of Facebook Messenger and Slack or whatever else it may be. But if you have 10 remote employees and all of them think differently about that, and they look at Slack first versus thinking about a phone call, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So even something as simple as how you're going to communicate is really, really important to get everybody on the same page. So this team agreement, and I will send you this document once we're done here, but this team agreement is something that allows your team to get on the same page, but it's also really great because when you bring on new team members, you already have this team agreement in place. So you can say, this is what we're doing right now, and this is how we do it. And that gives them very clear expectations of how they can seamlessly be brought into the team and get to work immediately. And as with all things in life, this is not a set of rules that should be set in stone forever. This is something that is meant to be consistently looked at and changed. So you can create the cadence as you see fit. You know, this team agreement could be something that you check out at the end of those 2 weeks if you're doing those retrospectives. Could be something maybe you do every season. Maybe it's something you do biannually, or maybe it's something that you do every single year. That is totally up to you. But I'll send you that after we're done with this document, after we're done with this webinar. And I think you get a lot of value out of that. So secret number 2, facilitate connectivity. So my suggestion, make communication easier and less have to by trying to use Slack, GroupMe, Zoom, GoToMeeting. The options are endless. So I have my personal preferences with a lot of these different communication tools that allow you I think we all like texting. Texting is great to be able to communicate back and forth, but texting leaves a lot to be desired regarding how you organize thoughts, how you organize conversations. And so GoToMeeting, GroupMe, Slack, these all allow you to communicate and be able to organize these conversations. So there are no right or wrong programs to be using here, but I would very much recommend that you don't try using all 15 of these at the same time. And really the goal here is to maybe try 1 or 2 out and see what the pros and cons are. And if the pros outweigh the cons, go for it. The big goal is to just get rid of those never-ending email chains. We've all been there where you just have something that's incredibly simple that 18, 19, 20 emails later still hasn't been done because it's just this never-ending set of messages being back and forth. That is absolutely draining for everybody involved. So try to avoid those if you can. Mind your manners. Say thank you. You know, Chris mentioned this the other day, and I love it. And that he mentioned that he tries to say thank you to individuals, even for simple things. You know, I think maybe this is a Hoosier hospitality thing, but I still thank people for opening doors for myself. If somebody lets me in, if there's a traffic jam and I'm trying to turn, I give people a really big energetic thumbs up for doing that. And it's easy to show appreciation when you're using nonverbal communication, but in a remote team, you don't have nonverbal communication to rely upon, right? It's mostly just either text or it's a conversation via phone and occasionally video. So be creative with how you're saying thank you. I love some e-cards because I'm a pretty sarcastic gentleman. I have a strong sense of, I really appreciate dry humor. And so just being creative, you know, maybe sending a meme that says thanks about something that's happening currently, which is kind of funny. Just be creative with it. Even just sending an email that's 50 words that says, I really appreciate what you did and I thank you for that. That goes a really long way. And then go one-on-one with perks. So what I mean by this is if you're going to have a lunch meeting, let's say every month, and you're buying lunch for the whole office, figure out a creative way to buy food for someone who's a remote employee. You know, here in Indianapolis, we've got Cluster Truck, we've got Grubhub. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that you can get food delivered to your workplace. And so figure out how you can, don't exclude your remote employees from the benefits that your physical employees are getting. Figure out creative ways to be able to allow them to share a meal with you, even though they are not within possibly the same city, state, or even country. So secret number 3, respect boundaries. This one is huge. So what do I mean by that? Well, the term flexibility, I said that a lot earlier in the session about it seems really exciting for remote teams to be able to have flexible environments. Well, the problem with that is that often managers or other individuals who aren't remote employees think that the remote employees themselves are just sitting and staring at a screen, waiting to be called upon to work, and that they're not doing anything outside of working. And so, yes, the flexibility should be used to describe the physical work environments that they can be productive from, but don't use the term flexible regarding their allotted times when they're supposed to work. So a good example of this is I've been a part of teams where there's an expectation of how many hours I should be working in a week or how many hours I should be working in a day, but there's not an expectation of when I need to work those hours. And I think that that's an important distinction, because for certain creatives, I used to play in a lot of different bands. I'm a drummer. Starting my work day at 6 or 7 in the morning after I've been out playing a show until 1 or 2 in the morning wouldn't seem ideal. And so to be a part of a remote team where you can allow people to start working at 9 or 10 or 11 is totally fine, as long as it's set up that the expectations are clear of how much they need to be working, and making sure that everybody's on the same page with deadlines. So just keep that in mind, that flexible doesn't mean that these people are on call 24/7, unless you set up that expectation in advance. Also, set the tone and priorities for communication channels. I mentioned this earlier, but it's really, really important to set up, and you'll see this more when I send you the team agreement, but what is that cadence of expected communication? And if somebody starts work at 7 a.m., they need to know when other people are working and when they're going to be available, because if they need something right at 7 a.m. and they understand that the rest of their team is not going to be there, that's not going to work. So that's important as well. And then also, vacations for remote employees. Are they truly on vacation? You know, treating them, are you treating them as if they're on or off? Take note of that statistic that I mentioned before, that only 1 to 10% of remote employees, and maybe they were just lying in that in that study to not get in trouble because they didn't want their employers to not know that they were on vacation all the time. I doubt that that's the case. But, you know, when people go on vacation, they are trying to, when people are going on vacation, you know, they're trying to really get away and they're trying to reset their minds, right? And so I think that's really important to let people truly go on vacation. All right, and the final takeaway here, secret number 4, people are people. They are not titles. We hire individuals to fulfill roles and titles typically, but humans are still humans. So it's really important that we don't forget this. So think about how remote employees are contributing to culture outside of the physical office. So consider creating a gratitude wall in Slack or in Trello, wherever your employees aren't going to forget about it, and create it. So I've done this in a lot of physical environments where I've worked in retail before, and we would have a wall with sticky notes where if someone that we worked with did something great, whether it be for the team or for a customer, we would have them write a note and then just put it up on the wall. And it would just be a great way for everyone to share their gratification for the great work that someone did. You can do this just as easily in a remote setting. Trello is a great place to do this. You could create a column within Trello. You could create an entirely separate board that only has notes that people have left for one another, sharing their gratitude. And what you'll find is, once you get that ball rolling, people will look for those opportunities to appreciate one another, and that's going to exponentially increase the positivity within the work culture, which is great. Are you fostering the personal dreams of remote employees? Do you know more about the employees than just their favorite sports team or their favorite Netflix show? You know, I think we're all really busy, and we tend to, with people that we've just met, there might be this one thing that we latch onto. You know, somebody says, I like this certain band or I like this show. And I think that's fine to create commonality with individuals and have talking points. But as time goes on, you need to know more about that individual than just who their favorite basketball team is, or what kind of car they drive. You know, talk to them about their family. Talk to them about what are some of the dreams that they have in general. You know, when they go on vacation, don't ask them where they went, but why did they go there? Those are really, really important questions. And I'm a huge fan of using creative icebreakers to start meetings. Don't ask people, you know, what their favorite book is and why. Ask questions. Like I did this for a remote workshop that I hosted a few weeks ago, and I asked everybody in the group if you could start a cover band. Who is the artist that you would cover, and what instrument would you play? And that was really fun, because then all of a sudden we found out, after everybody gave their 2 cents, that we basically had a whole band ready to go. And so we just consistently had this rapport talking about this imaginary band that we wanted to create, and also coming up with a fun name for it as well. Don't underestimate your remote employees as ambassadors for your organization in new places. So I used to run a co-working facility for a couple of years, and a lot of companies that I knew nothing about, I learned from a remote employee who was from the original location where that organization existed, and then they moved from there to Indianapolis for whatever reason it may be. And those remote employees are very important ambassadors to share your brand and share the mission of what you're trying to do as an organization. And so if you rule with an iron fist and don't give the flexibility for your remote workers to really thrive, they're not going to speak about your company in a very strong tone. And you're going to be missing out on some opportunities to get some great brand recognition, and for that employee to really be an ambassador and spread the word about what you're doing. So don't forget about that. And then bring humanity to your teams. You know, if you have a lot of remote employees, think about holding an annual or biannual on-site. You know, a lot of organizations that are in a physical environment have an annual off-site event. Well, think about having an on-site where, if there isn't one central office where everyone works, it's a fun idea to maybe like create a quote unquote temporary headquarters for a few days, and get all your physical employees in the same room so they can all talk to one another and really get to know each other. And don't take that time to only talk about business. You know, allow these people to get to know one another, to decompress, and to really talk about their lives in general. They'll bring up work because that's why everybody's there. But I think it's really important to allow opportunities for people to talk outside of just the work environment. And as I put here, you know, you cannot replace a hug, a handshake, or a high five via computers and technology. So don't forget that. All right, so this is the end-ish. And the reason I put ish is because I just threw a lot out at you, a lot of different things to test out with remote teams. I also put the end-ish here because guess what? Those were quote unquote secrets of great remote teams. But there is no secret to creating a great remote team. So surprise, the cat's out of the bag. You have to be consistently iterative and be creative and try new things to keep your team engaged. So I hope that all those takeaways were super helpful for you all, and being able to be creative and maybe test out some of those options. So we are all finished for today's Slinkythink, hashtag Slinkythink sessions. Now the joke is I say the hashtag Slinkythink sessions, and Chris, being an old school guy, calls them the # Slinkythink sessions. So I actually know what a # is, but there are probably a lot of people younger than me that have no idea what that is. So if you hear us say that differently, that's why. So that does it for today. If you'd like to know more about BeLife, feel free to check us out at our website, www.belife.com. You can shoot me an email directly. I'm actually going to be sending you all an email in literally just a couple of minutes that's going to have all kinds of fun stuff for you. It's going to have the slides from today's workshop. It's going to have that team agreement that you can use moving forward to establish those really solid foundations for your remote teams. We have a couple of workshops coming up that I think are perfect for anyone who's looking to develop their remote teams. And one is called Working Together Anywhere, which is really the basic core foundations of creating great remote teams. And that is for any individual or organizations who are maybe just getting started with being remote or considering it. And then we have what we call a 200 level course, which is called Leading Virtual Teams. And leading virtual teams is more about managing and development. And if you're already in a remote environment, how do you take what you're doing right now and take it to the next level? So those courses are both going to start. They're 2 hours each week, and they're for 4 straight weeks, so 8 total hours. And they're going to start April 22nd. And I'm going to send you the details for those in this email coming up, and also a discount code to take 20% off to sign up for those workshops. And that's basically it. So please keep in touch with us. Our next hashtag Slinkythink sessions is going to be volume 3, and we're going to talk about management 3.0, and that's going to be April 9th at the same time, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Management 3.0 is this really great innovative ideology that talks about how management should really be about servant leadership, and that the power of great organizations are from teams trusting themselves. And so we're going to unpack the ins and outs of what management 3.0 are. So that is live, and I will send you the link for that as well. So once again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you joining us. As always, these sessions are free of charge, and they're going to be every 2 weeks on Tuesdays at noon. So mark your calendar, invite any and all. And from myself and Chris, all of us at BeLife, we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon. Cheers. Thank you.